Good morning. Because of some issues that we're facing with the OLS and Class Connect sessions, I wanted to ensure you had the information you needed for today's lesson. Make sure that you watch this and you go through it so that you have the information you need. There will be an exit ticket at the end, and you have to complete it in order to earn credit for your attendance and participation. So today we're actually going to go through the lesson together. This is 4.2, a lesson on the south of the Sahara. We're going to be talking about African societies and culture. You should have already gone through 4.1, which dealt with North Africa. So now we're going to be moving into Central and Southern Africa. I'm going to read through some of this with you, and I really hope that this helps you guys get a grasp on it. Plus, it won't mean that you have extra work to do because you will have done the lesson with me. You can go on and do the checkpoint next. Make sure that you go into the lesson resources. You can see where I'm pointing at it right now. And print off the student guide or save it on your computer and fill it out as you go through the lesson. That student guide is very, very important and it's extremely helpful. All right, lesson 2 is south of the Sahara. One of the largest migrations in history occurred over many centuries when Bantu-speaking peoples began spreading south and east over sub-Saharan Africa in search of the fertile lands for farming. They carried with them not only their tools and technology, but also their language and traditions. They eventually established permanent settlements where their descendants still live today. In Northeast Africa, complex trade spurred the growth of two unique cultures whose power and wealth rivaled that of ancient Egypt. So the goals it's telling us, we're going to recognize the cause and effects of the Bantu migration, so this great migration of Bantu-speaking peoples. And we're also going to learn how to describe the history and key characteristics of the kingdoms of Kush and Aksum. You need to read Chapter 10, Section 1 from the Bantu migrations to the end. So you're going to read from page 206 to page 212 in your textbook, and that's how you're going to answer the questions on the student guide. Then you'll complete the use what you know activity and complete the checkpoint. So let's start by going through and reading that chapter 10 section. So it starts on page 206 and it's the Bantu migrations. Let me go ahead and pull this up for you so that you're able to see the textbook as we read. Okay, so here we are in the section 1 of chapter 10. We need to scroll through. This is a map. Remember, we're looking at south of the Sahara. So if this is the Sahara right here at the north large section of Africa, we're looking south, east, and west. If we move to page 206, we'll start reading here. The Bantu migrations. Human history is shaped by the movement, settlement, and interaction of different peoples. You have learned how the human story has been influenced by migrations, when large groups of people leave one place and travel a long distance to settle in another place. Early humans migrated for many reasons. Some migrated for reasons related to environmental changes. A changing climate might lead to a dwindling food supply. Some migrated for political reasons, such as the desire to flee from invaders. In times, especially in modern industrial age, people have migrated for economic reasons, leaving impoverished homelands to find work and a better life in some distant place. One of the largest human migrations in history occurred over many centuries in Africa. Historians vary in their estimates at the time of these migrations, but beginning in at least 2,000 years ago, and continuing for more than 1,000 years, the Bantu-speaking peoples began to migrate. These were not a single people, but various groups who spoke one of hundreds of languages that linguists categorize as Bantu. From a region just south of the Sahara, which is part of present-day Nigeria, various Bantu-speaking people migrated to the south and east, spreading over much of the African continent below the equator, like the movement of the Indo-Europeans out of Central Asia. We talked about that in chapter 4. The long migration from Western Africa was the result of push and pull factors. One factor that pushed some groups of Bantu-speaking peoples to migrate was their use of slash and burn agriculture. Using this method, people cleared forests by cutting down trees, burning them, or both. Farmers then cultivated the cleared land until the nutrients in the soil were depleted, meaning they then have to move elsewhere because they can't farm that land anymore. So then they move on to new land where they again do the same thing. They clear the forest, plant the crops, and once the soil is no longer productive, they have to move again. Because much of Africa's soil is relatively poor in nutrients to begin with, slash and burn agriculture pushed farming communities to move often. Another push factor in the migrations of Bantu-speaking peoples was desertification. Make sure you pay attention to what this word means. The process by which a desert expands. As the Sahara became drier and more barren, the desert grew larger. It pushed south, transforming once fertile areas of the Sahel into uninhabitable wasteland. The desertification that enlarged the Sahara pushed the farmers who saw their cropland swallowed up by sand. The relatively fertile areas of the African savanna provided a pull to help launch the long migrations. An early wave of migration brought Bantu-speaking peoples to the edge of the great rainforests surrounding the Congo River, where many settled in small villages. The dense forest did not allow for large farms. Some Bantu-speaking groups continued southeast, drawn to the open savanna, which was better suited for agriculture. Other groups migrated south and settled along the west coast of southern Africa, where they raised goats, sheep, and cattle on the grassy plains above the Kalahari. At times, the migrations advanced rapidly. At other times, they slowed almost to a halt as people stayed in the same villages for generations before being pushed to move by an increasing population and the need for more land and food. Bantu-speaking peoples had spread out across almost all of the sub-Saharan Africa by AD 400. They brought more than just their languages and passed through the region on their way to Egypt. No, that's not right. They brought more than just their languages and cultures were over here. They carried iron tools and weapons that allowed them to dominate the nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers they displaced. Over time, the Bantu migrants established permanent settlements and developed distinct cultural traditions. Their descendants still live throughout sub-Saharan Africa today. In about 1400 BC, Egyptian traders headed south to a land called Nubia, in what is now Sudan, where they bartered for goods from the African heartland. According to one ancient stone tablet, the traders returned to Egypt with gold, ivory, ebony, which is a dark wood used for ornamental sculpture, leopard skins, and more than 100 enslaved people. Unlike West African farm societies, East African civilizations supported themselves mainly through trade. Nubia's location made it a busy center of trade as goods and resources from Central and Sub-Saharan Africa passed through the region on their way to Egypt and the people of the Mediterranean world. Nubian traders grew rich and powerful by controlling nearly all of the commerce up and down the southern half of the Nile. As Nubia thrived through trade, the people of Nubia created a powerful kingdom that the Egyptians called Kush. The rulers of Kush modeled themselves on Egyptian pharaohs. They built enormous pyramids for burial and decorated tombs with Egyptian-style art. The people of Kush also embraced Egyptian culture and religion and wore Egyptian fashions. As you have learned, around 750 BC, the Kushites, led by a king named Pianki, marched north and conquered Egypt. Kushite pharaohs continued to rule Egypt for nearly a century. In Nubia, the leaders of Kush established their capital city at Napata. In the mid-600s BC, Assyrian conquerors pushed the Kushites out of Egypt. In Nubia, Kush continued to control the Upper Nile for hundreds of years. Around 450 BC, the Kushites moved their capital from Napata to Meroe, a city between the 5th and 6th cataracts of the Nile, cataracts being waterfalls. Meroe was located on a fertile plain. Nearby forests provided plenty of timber, essential fuel for forging iron. In Meroe, the Kushites produced great quantities of iron weapons and tools. Archaeologists working at the site of the ancient city have unearthed huge heaps of slag, a byproduct of smelting iron. The Greek historian Herodotus, we know him as the father of history, described the magnificence of Meroe in the 5th century BC. Their gold is obtained in great plenty. Huge elephants abound, with wild trees of all sorts and ebony, and the men are taller, handsomer, and longer lived than anywhere else. As Meroe's fame spread, so did the variety of goods the people traded: ivory, gold, ebony, fine jewels, fragrances, and enslaved people. In time, Kush not only controlled the profitable trade moving down the Nile, but also the sea routes to the east and land routes west. By the 1st century BC, the Kushites were sending caravans of camels across the Sahara to the North African coast, and shipping goods across the sea to India. Kush thrived for many centuries, but the Roman Empire's conquest of Egypt in the 1st century BC led to disaster for Kush. The Romans devastated Kushite territory and carried thousands off to slavery. Though Kush continued to trade with Rome and other peoples for the next 200 years, the defeat greatly diminished its power. By the 3rd century AD, power and wealth shifted from Kush to another East African kingdom, Aksum. The kingdom of Aksum was located in what are now the countries of Eritrea and Ethiopia, in an area known as the Horn of Africa. The capital city, also called Aksum, lay southeast of Meroe in the high country of modern-day Ethiopia. Historians believe the city of Aksum was founded as a trading outpost by Arabs from across the Red Sea, probably sometime during the 6th century BC. The city grew and prospered as a busy hub on the trade routes from Egypt and Meroe to the bustling port of Adulis on the Red Sea. The location of Adulis gave traders access to routes up the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, or through the Gulf of Aden to the Arabian Sea, and from there to the Persian Gulf and all the way to India. During the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, as Aksum took greater control of trade, once controlled by Kush, the kingdom's wealth and power grew. As Aksum expanded, it became an increasingly cosmopolitan kingdom, attracting diverse peoples from various lands. Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Persians, Arabs, and Indians, and more came to do business. All wanted to buy salt and gold from West Africa, as well as luxuries including ivory, rhinoceros horn, and frankincense, which is an aromatic product from tree resins. Roman traders especially sought gold to meet the needs of their growing empire's monetary system. In turn, the Aksumite merchants bought silk and spices, glass, wine, olive oil, and goods made of brass and copper. Amid the many tongues spoken, Greek was the main language of business. The kingdom of Aksum reached its height in the mid-300s AD under a strong king named Ezana. Ezana expanded Aksum's territory. He conquered the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, what is now the country of Yemen. He invaded Kush, and in AD 350 his troops burned the once thriving city of Meroe. King Ezana is perhaps best remembered for making Christianity the official religion of Aksum. The cosmopolitan population of Aksum held a variety of beliefs. Most Aksumites were animists who also worshipped a creator god. Trade brought Jews and Buddhists to the kingdom. Many Christians also came, especially from the Roman Empire, where Christianity was rapidly gaining converts in the early to mid 300s. Around AD 320, King Ezana converted to Christianity and declared it the official religion of Aksum. Some historians think that his conversion was motivated by a desire to maintain trading relationships with the Mediterranean world. Nevertheless, Ezana established an important religious tradition for Ethiopia. While many religions are practiced in Ethiopia today, the majority of people are Christian. More than 20 million Ethiopians belong to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, a branch of Christianity with some distinct beliefs and practices of its own. Among the ancient African kingdoms, Aksum was unusual in some ways. Besides Egypt and Meroe, Aksum is the only ancient African kingdom we know of that had a system of writing. The written language of Aksum was called Ge'ez. Brought by early Arab inhabitants, the New Testament was translated into cheese. Aksum was also the first sub-Saharan kingdom to mint its own coins. The Aksumites minted coins of gold, silver, and copper, which helped them facilitate trade and control commerce. In agriculture, the Aksumites found ways to adapt to rugged, hilly terrain where they lived. They used terrace cultivation, a method of growing crops on hillsides by planting on flat ridges resembling a staircase built into slopes. The terraces helped retain water and prevented soil erosion. As Aksumite kings grew increasingly wealthy and powerful, some erected giant stone monuments called stelae. Some stelae still stand in Ethiopia today. More than 140 stelae were erected in the city of Aksum. These tall stone obelisks marked the graves of rulers or commemorated important events. The largest stele, standing over 100 feet tall and weighing more than 700 tons, was carved from a single block of granite that had been moved more than 2 miles through the mountains. Aksum prospered for 800 years until the 8th century, when Arab and Persian traders took over the commerce flowing out of Africa. Aksum fell to invaders who followed a new and rapidly spreading religion, Islam. In AD 710, Islamic invaders deserted the port city of Adulis. Aksum's leaders moved their capital to the north and soon found themselves isolated as a Christian outpost in an increasingly Islamic region. Like other African civilizations, Aksum at its height enjoyed great wealth and influence, but its influence did not expand beyond a limited geographic region. You'll go on and read the trading for gold in Aksum, and this is an important part of your reading because not only is it teaching us about primary sources, and it is a very interesting read, but it goes on to help us complete our student guide. Now let's go ahead and return to our course, and we're going to go back through and finish the lesson. So we've read the long bit of chapter there and learned a lot about the kingdoms of Kush and Aksum. Remember, they rival that of Egypt. They're very wealthy. They have a lot of gold, ivory, ebony, things that would definitely have been wanted. So you want to fill out that student guide. And then it's telling you to go ahead and complete the checkpoint. But before we can do that, there were two things that we wanted to cover. The use what you know activity. That's on our student guide. So let's go ahead and open up our student guide, and you should be able to see that here. So down at the bottom is the use what you know. So it's saying to use your book to help you complete the following tasks and answer the following questions. You can also use the map on page 203 and the book's atlas. So you want to indicate and label the kingdom of Kush using the map. Then you want to determine how did Kush's location along the Nile River help it grow rich and powerful. Remember, it's at the bottom of the Nile River, so it's the lower half of the Nile River. So they have water, they have access to the sea, they have good trading location. It's definitely making sure that they are right there where they can trade with a variety of people and use that trade to help them grow wealthy. What goods did traders in Meroe offer their customers? Remember, we talked about ivory, ebony. Did they trade silk? No, they actually wanted silk and spices. Enslaved peoples, that was something that was traded as well. What obstacles do you think the Kushite traders encountered when the caravan routes to North African coast? So look at the map and think geographically, what might they have encountered? What obstacles do you think traders from Aksum encountered during their voyages to India? Again, look at the map and base it on geographical location. What people came to Aksum to trade? Remember, we talked about people from India, people from the Mediterranean, further into Africa. Lots of different peoples were coming in to trade with Aksum. And what did they take home with them? What did they bring? What did the people of Aksum want? What did they trade for? And about how many miles was a voyage from Adulis to the end of the Persian Gulf? You'll have to use your map for that as well. This is that map. So you're going to look at it and you're going to base it on what you know of the area. So we have the Sahara, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean. Here we're looking at the area where the kingdoms existed. What might they have encountered? Are there mountains? Is there desert? What would have caused issues for them? So once you're done with that, you'll go back into your course and you're going to complete the checkpoint. You'll simply go to 4.2 checkpoint. You have plenty of time to take it, but it's only a couple of questions, and you'll base it on what we just read through. If you have any questions, please let me know. Completing this 4.2 checkpoint is your exit ticket, so make sure you complete it and that you do well on it. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll be back to normal tomorrow.